Hello everybody, this is David Saffer. I'm with Datacolor, and this is Screen to Print Match. It's sponsored by Datacolor and co-sponsored by Zenfolio. And today we're going to talk about not just color management issues, but the range of activities that surround managing color from the time you see an image on your screen all the way through to your final print. We'll even talk a little bit about evaluating your prints. The idea is to help you become better photographers and also to help you bring what I feel that images really aren't complete until they're printed. So to bring your work to completion in a way that makes it as satisfying for you as it can possibly be. A couple of words about this image on the screen that you're seeing right now. This is taken in Utah in Antelope Slot Canyons. And this is a shot that's almost looking directly straight up from the floor of a canyon that's underground. Well, it's a very interesting shot, lots of texture, a little bit unusual in that the water carves the rocks like this, so very challenging image to print. So talking about screen to print match, why color management? And those of you that have joined me before will know that the thing that's really important to me as far as color management goes is that it produces consistent, accurate, predictable, repeatable color across a range of devices. And that means your camera, your display, your printer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it also makes image editing easier and quicker. One of the most common things that people run into when they're making prints is they make a print, they bring it back to the screen, it doesn't look like what they were editing, so they tweak what's on the screen, they go back and they make another print, et cetera, lather, rinse, repeat. And that's wasteful of time and money and energy, and those are all important things. I would much rather see people making one proof print and then making a final print. That would be ideal, and many people I talk to make 3, 4, 5 proof prints. So this print tweak cycle is one of the things that we can break if we get the screen to print match workflow under control. Now here's 3 images. They're all slightly different. The one on the upper left, this is an aspen tree on the Eastern Sierras in the fall a couple of years ago. And I think you can see some differences between them. Going over the internet, not so easy to see the subtleties, but I'm going to try this anyway. And that is on the upper left, there's a little bit more orange and deeper yellows in the tree. Similar to what you might see on, say, a luster or glossy photograph. In the middle, it's much more painterly and pastel colors, similar to what you might see on a fine art or watercolor paper. And then on the right, there's some color adjustments. So some of the orange tones have been taken out. So you can see there's a lot of variations on the same image. The idea being that you as a photographer and artist would be making some of these choices as you went through your editing cycle. The important thing is that you be able to see what's going on the screen and know that what's on the screen is what's going to come out of the printer. So here's our introduction to the workflow. The workflow that we're going to go through today together during the webinar. We're going to talk about display calibration and profiling, how you can improve your on-screen image quality. We're going to talk about soft proofing and image editing for both Photoshop and Lightroom 5. And soft proofing is a term that a lot of you might not be familiar with. Soft proofing involves getting a real-time preview of what your image is going to look like in print on the paper that you intend to print on. So the screen is going to mimic your paper output. We're going to talk about creating and using profiles for your printer, using profiles with what's called application managed color, and we want to make sure that your images sparkle from start to finish. So we'll talk a little bit about display calibration. This is a photograph taken by a friend of mine, Rick Russell. This is from Hunts Mesa over in Monument Valley. And on the right is the Spider 4 Elite calibration device. Now, why display calibration? Display calibration involves, each display has its own color signature, and even if they're made by the same manufacturer, they're sitting side by side on your desk, they can still look different because the manufacturing processes change subtly over time. They may replace a component, they may decide to make a hardware or firmware change. Things do vary from display to display, and never mind between 2 different manufacturers. I get consulting calls all the time, people setting up studios and they're using 2 different monitors and they want to match them. And, you know, that becomes an issue sometimes. Displays change over time. The backlight ages just like any other light source. And so as the display changes, you need to recalibrate it to manage the brightness level, to get your highlight and shadow detail under control, and to also manage the color rendering that it's giving you so you're getting accurate color on screen. Wide gamut displays, when they're delivered, are frequently oversaturated and very high contrast. We call that torch mode. It's set that way so that a retailer can put this on a showroom floor and it can compete with other displays out in the open in a bright lighting environment and look good. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to do the right thing for you when you're editing your photos. And again, you're looking for highlight, shadow, detail, mid-tone transitions, things like that that are going to match to your printer and be under control. And of course, you do want to have some kind of correlation between the ambient light, the room that you're working in, and the brightness of the screen. Some of the workflow applications that are involved in screen-to-print match, they also apply to shooting tethered, and you can see here, this is an example of shooting tethered in the studio. There is one thing wrong with this photograph, is that there's a pretty bright light shining on the screen, and there's a lot of colored tubes on the wall. You know, those are rolled, you know, paper rolls for backdrops. But having that much color in your environment and that much light in your editing environment does not work in your favor. It's sometimes unavoidable in the studio, but for an image editing environment, this would not be an ideal situation. You also want to have display calibration going when you're sharing work, so that if you're sharing work with someone in a different office, if you're both calibrated, you at least have some hope that the 2 are going to correlate and make your life easier. You want a calibrated display, and this includes your iPad or maybe even your iPhone for portfolio or field reviews with clients and customers and presentations. Now, I get asked questions all the time about which display should I get, and there's just a few examples here. And I'm going to start at the bottom and mention that CNET.com has some really good monitor reviews. They've got a good database. As far as I know, it's an ongoing project. I haven't checked it in the last month or so. But Eric Franklin's one of the authors. He does a really good job of reviewing these displays and giving you the straight skinny on what's going on, how well they perform, and whether or not they're a good value for the dollar. Some of the displays that I've used that I like include the Dell UltraSharp. There are several levels of Dell UltraSharp, so the ones that are a little bit more towards the higher end of the price range seem to be noticeably better. LaCie makes some very nice displays, as does AZO and NEC. So what happens during display calibration? During display calibration, you're going to plug your spider in, and that's the device you see on the screen here, and you're going to run software which displays a series of color patches. And during that progression, the device, which is called a colorimeter, it has 7 color sensors in it, is going to read those color patches and decide whether the color patch looks right or wrong. If it's right, it's going to make notes to itself and keep a text file for this. And create a profile later. If it's wrong, it's going to make notes for that and include that in the profile later. And eventually, as it goes through all these patches, which takes somewhere between 10 and 12 minutes or so, it's going to create a sort of a fingerprint for your display. And that's going to be used every time you boot up your computer. It's going to analyze that fingerprint and say, this display needs to be adjusted so it's going to do the right thing. Now, you have to recalibrate about once a month, but once it's done, it takes about 5 minutes instead of 10 to 12. So here's one of the first screens that you're going to see. There's a couple of screens that precede this, but they're pretty straightforward. They ask you to warm up your display and ask you what kind of display you have. But the most important one here, I think, is, or one of the most important ones, is first of all, which kind of calibration are you going to select? And the first time around, you'll select the full calibration. And then take note of these drop-down menus. You see, this is a slide, so I can't make it drop down. But see where my cursor is. All right. Gamma 2.2, a white point of 6500, and a brightness level of about 120. Those are the levels that you want to start with to get your screen-to-print match cycle going. Now, why is that? Gamma 2.2 is the standard right now, and that's the way that the screen, it's partly contrast, but it also has a lot to do with how it renders different tones and different levels of brightness. The white point is the basically color temperature. At 6500K, it's going to be very neutral. Okay, some display calibration devices tend to calibrate a little bit warmer than that. I tend to prefer a calibration that's neutral, and then I can add the toning or the adjustments later in Photoshop or Lightroom myself. The brightness level of 120, if you haven't done that before, when you bring that brightness level down to 120, you're going to find that it looks a little bit dim, but that's a good level for matching to your prints. Remember that the screen gives off light and the print reflects light. So in a good lighting environment, your office is going to look a little bit, I know I hate to use this phrase, but it's good, it's descriptive, cocktail hour. You need one lamp in the back corner of the room so you can see and move around without stumbling over things or stepping on a pad or something like that. And at 120, the screen will be the brightest thing in the room, and it won't be competing with anything like a bright window or overhead lights or desk lamps or anything like that. And at that point, your color vision will adjust to what the screen is showing you, and everything will fall into place. One of the other screens that's available is called Spider Proof, and you can see here there's 16 images. They're in 4 groups. If you double click on a group, it will enlarge, and I've given you an enlargement here on the lower right of a before calibration scenario. You can see that the colors don't look natural. The green in the grass is kind of pale and anemic. The sky is kind of washed out. You can see the colors here aren't very rich. This is, I think, a picture from Tuscany. So is this one on the right. And it's just not making it. And then if you look over here, this is the calibrated view. Nice, rich colors in the garden, deep blue skies for the church, that sort of thing. And so the calibration is giving you a natural look. It's not overdone. It's not underdone. The brightness level is good enough for you to be able to see the details, preserves the mid-tone transitions, keeps the highlight and shadow detail intact. Look at this on the jar here. Look at that nice transition line on the jar. And you can also look at the transition lines on the black and white photos. Look at that on her chin and on her cheekbone. Very nice. So that's the kind of scenario we're shooting for. We really want to be able to see what's going on and make it be realistic and also be able to match it to our print going down the road. Now I'm going to introduce a concept to you here called soft proofing. Soft proofing is a term that's a holdover from the days of 4-color press, when everything went to a 4-color press. Nobody owned an inkjet printer. Everybody talked about soft proofing, which was making a proof before you went to the big press and made 10,000 books. What I call it is a live color preview. And in both Photoshop and in Lightroom, you can create a preview that shows you what your paper and ink combination is going to do on your printer, so that while you're editing, you're going to be able to see whatever editing changes you make, that's what your print is going to look like. Here's how you do it. In Photoshop, and this is CS6, you would go up to the menu choice that says View and go to Proof Setup and go to Custom. And when you click on Custom, the Customize Proof Condition panel will pop up. This is it right here where my cursor is moving around. It says, and here's where we get into vocabulary that I don't like very much, but it is what it is. It says Proof Conditions and Device to Simulate. Really what you're going to do is select the paper profile that you're going to use when you make your print. Now paper profiles, like display calibration profiles, are a fingerprint for your paper, print, ink combination. And so when you enable this, Photoshop is going to look at that and go, okay, I need to adjust the colors on the screen for the editor to be able to see exactly what's going to happen when the print is made. Typically, I use a rendering tint of either perceptual or relative colorimetric. Some people use saturation. I guarantee the picture police will not come to your house if you experiment with these. You can do as you please and see what works for you. But I would start with perceptual and work my way around to the other options. This is a very useful tool. There's one little hiccup in this, is that you have to turn this on every time you open an image. It's not sticky. So if you close an image or you switch to another image, you're going to have to go back up to that View menu and go Proof Setup Custom and go to this Customize Proof Condition. You can save this, okay, and then once you do that, it will show up in this list right here where it says Photo Rag. It will start adding other setups that you've saved, so you can go right to them without having to click on all these things over and over again. Very, very useful tool. I highly recommend it. Every time you open an image and you know you're going to make a print, boom, you go to Proof Setup and set it up the right way. Now here's a comparison, A versus B. I admit that I've adjusted these to make a point over the internet and on an internet browser. I can't know what you really know what you're going to see. So this is what it might look like on a highly glossy, saturated print or luster paper, you know, a very hard finish, RC style paper. And on the lower right, this is what it might look like on Entrada or Hanamiel Photo Rag. Much more painterly, softer edges, less contrast. And so you can see that when you were editing one or another of these, that you might do different things. You might be less aggressive with the one that's going on the watercolor paper because it has a somewhat diminished dynamic range. It's not going to have blacks that are as deep as the glossy paper. You can't really go down and keep the detail in the black, so you're going to see that right away. If you make a levels or a curves adjustment, you're going to know your print is going to have blacks that are crushed, and maybe you'll back off of that, just as an example. This is how you do it in Lightroom 5. This is a picture of the old theater in San Luis Obispo, the Fremont. It's one of my favorites. You know, I see some questions coming up on the screen. I'm going to try and answer some of these questions at the end of the webinar. We're having some technical difficulties with this, so please bear with me. Please be patient. Soft proofing in Lightroom. You can see here that if you're in the Develop module, it's highlighted at the top. What will appear on the lower left now, this started with, I believe, Lightroom 4, soft proofing. So you can click this, or you can go Command or Control S depending on your computer, and it will be enabled. The next screen that we're going to look at, if I've got this right, I do. Once soft proofing is enabled, you can see the red square over here. You can see the profile and the rendering intent pop up just the way they did in Photoshop. You'll also see the soft proofing logo pop up over here over your histogram. And let's just go back for a second. If I click on the right thing, it will. See the difference in the histogram? So the histogram without the soft proofing, histogram with the soft proofing, and you can see on this particular paper, the Colorado fiberglass, that the reds are going to clip just a little bit. See that straight line? So the histogram is telling you in advance what's going to happen to your print, as well as the appearance on the screen is going to tell you what's going to happen with your print. In this case, again, it's set to perceptual rendering intent, and this is fiberglass. Now, and there's one little tip that you should know about as far as Lightroom goes. Unlike Photoshop, in Photoshop, when you install a printer, all the profiles for that printer are going to load from that disk or from that download into Photoshop. Photoshop is going to see them. In Lightroom, you have to click on this download, and at the bottom of the drop-down, it's going to see load a profile or import a profile, and you're going to have to import each profile that you want to use in Lightroom. I don't know why they made it that way, but there it is. So if you don't see it there, don't panic. Just slide down to the bottom, look for the import tag on the list, and then you will see a list of all the profiles that are on your computer. You can select it. Once you select it, that is sticky. You'll be able to see it again later when you go to that drop-down. Okay. Now I've switched to a rag paper. This is Moab Entrada. It competes with papers like Hanamiel Photo Rag. It's a very matte finish. It uses matte black ink instead of photo black ink. Again, and what I did was, I don't normally do this, simulate paper and ink. I did that to emphasize how much of a difference that you would see in the dynamic range of the print while you're editing. So you might do different things to this. You might actually go and make a contrast adjustment to this to make it look a little bit more punchy when you make the final print. I don't normally go simulate paper and ink because I think it's overkill. Generally speaking, Adobe probably does twice as much for you on screen with Simulate Paper and Ink as is really needed for an inkjet printer. Simulate Paper and Ink is really for a proof condition for a 4-color press, really not for inkjet, in my personal opinion. Okay? Now, we're moving along pretty fast today. Now, let's talk about profiles for your printer. Remember, we talked earlier about calibrating your display and how each display has its own fingerprint. And custom profiles for your printer, each printer is unique. It's an interesting thing. As good as they've gotten and as stable as the printers are nowadays, they are still different one to another, even among the same manufacturer, even with the same models. So here we see an Epson 3880. I have one, a friend of mine has one. They definitely behave differently. He's a little bit closer to the ocean. He's got a different household environment or studio environment than I do, and so his printer behaves slightly differently than mine. His is used less frequently. That has something to do with it, and et cetera, et cetera. So you want to control the color gamut and the range of color rendered. The print profile that you're going to make is made in a similar way, in many ways similar to that made on a display calibration. Some profiles are provided by manufacturers, but it's just for their printer and paper. So what does that mean? That means that if you have an Epson or an HP or a Canon printer and you're using their profiles, you're kind of stuck in the sense that you have to use their paper if you want to go sort of off the reservation or outside the bubble, and you want to use some other papers like Moab or Red River or LexJet. You're going to have a profile from one of them. Well, they can make a profile for you, but here's the hitch. They're making a profile for their printer. They're not making a profile for your printer. They're making a good profile, and it's going to do a good job, but the honest truth is that the best profile you can make is the one you make for your own machine, just like the one you make for your own display. That's why most people don't claim to be able to make display profiles that are transferable. It's less important in printing, but it still does make a difference to make your own profiles. If your color is critical or you're working with a lot of different papers or you want to start experimenting and move your art into a different area, I strongly recommend that you start exploring getting a printer calibration device and working with it. Let me go back and make sure I got to everything here. Just to sum up that slide, the custom profiles typically are tailored to the printer, the media, and the environment. And media is something that's important to mention here. Media paper, when you get a box of paper, it's going to come in an inner wrapper and things like that. Keep the box and the wrapper. Store the paper in the original packaging in a cool, dry place. Paper oxidizes and ages. The more environmental stress you subject it to, the more it changes. So the less exposure it gets to light and air pollution and changes in temperature and humidity, the better off you will be. It still will change in the box over time, but it will change less. Now, the media selection, we can talk a little bit about this. For more information about this, I do suggest that you see our webinar on making fine art prints, which has a lot more detail on this subject. But some of the basics, the glossy and luster are core media types. These are paper types that have strong contrast and color. They have the widest dynamic range probably amongst all the paper types that we could pick from. They're the ones that are most commonly used, particularly by people who are just starting out making their own prints. And they're probably the easiest to print on. They're also the easiest to get a screen-to-print match going. There are specialty papers and special finish papers such as metallics. There's some new metallic papers out that are very interesting, challenging to print on. They're very contrasty and very sharp-edged. When I say sharp-edged, the contrast lines, the edges of things that you see in the print are going to appear to be much sharper than they are on any other kind of paper. The ink almost seems to float on the surface in a way. The opposite of that in many ways is watercolor style or fine art papers. Those are more like the watercolor papers you see in the store for actual watercolor, and they have an inkjet, what's called an inkjet receiver layer, so the inkjet ink will stick on the paper. They're softer, they're painterly, they have less dynamic range. These are great for portraiture. They're great for still life and landscapes. It really depends on what you want to see, what you want to communicate in your art as a photographer. It gives you options that you just don't have on the standard glossy and luster papers or even the metallic papers. But the performance characteristics of most of these papers do require profiling, either from the manufacturer or on your own. So next we're going to talk briefly about how one does that. How do you use a device like SpiderPrint? You're going to print a neutral standardized patch target. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. This is what it looks like. You can see it's the same principle as the display calibration in the sense that you've got a series of color patches. You're going to read them with a scanner, a handheld scanning device, and the computer is going to decide whether the patches are up to par or not and create a profile to compensate for that. Okay, so here we go. You're going to print a neutral standardized patch target. I'm going to show you some of the details of this in a second. We're going to print with no color management. Turning off color management, those of you who have this device and are working with it, you should know that turning off color management varies among printers. Sometimes it's automatic, sometimes it's not. Particularly on Windows machines, you have to hunt around in the tabs in the printer driver dialog box to find the utility that you want and turn it on or off. So it's well worth the effort. You'll know right away if you've got color management enabled when you make the target print. It will look very dark and muddy. And so if that's the case, it's being double color managed and you have to go back to the printer dialog and fix that. Some smaller printers recently have had this function disabled. If you're thinking about getting a smaller printer and you are thinking about making custom prints and making custom profiles, it's a good idea to check that out. Another way to print without color management, you can, these targets, the target that I just showed you here on slide 23, is provided to you with the software as a TIFF file, and you can actually print that separately from the SpiderPrint software. If you're having difficulty getting the color management turned off, Adobe makes what's called the Adobe Print utility. It's free, and you can print anything, any file, via the Adobe Print utility without color management. So there is a workaround if you get jammed up. I'm going to take a sip of water. Okay, here we go. So when you start, you're going to put your media setup in. You're going to name the printer. You're going to put the name of the paper in, the ink type, and the driver media setting. That's an important part of this. I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. Put the date on it. All these are going to be printed on your target when you're printing from SpiderPrint. I almost went to click on the next button. Okay, and there's several print targets that are available to you. This quickest one is the high quality target, which is 225 patches on one sheet. Sometimes it's on 2 sheets depending on how you're set up. But I recommend that you use the high quality target plus the grays. It includes a lot of intermediate grayscale tones. It's going to give you a much more precise calibration. It's going to put you in a position to really have a much higher degree of control over what the print is going to look like, both from the standpoint of soft proofing and from the standpoint of the results on your final print. So the extended grays is a great thing. I think it's, as far as I know, it's unique to Datacolor, and it really gives you an advantage in terms of the quality of your final print. Here's what the dialogues look like when you're printing from SpiderPrint, say to an Epson Stylus Pro 3880. I want to point out a couple of things. You want to set the media type to be as close to the paper that you're using as possible. Let's say you're using, Red River paper and it's a luster paper. Well, you would pick the Epson media type that's closest to that media type because it's not going to show up here by name. So in this case, I'm going to pick the Epson Premium Photo Paper Luster. And a little tip for you: there's in this particular printer, there's 2 settings here: super fine 1440 DPI and super duper fine, or something like that, which is 2880. 2880, 99 times out of 100, is not going to give you a measurable or noticeable difference in print quality. It's a waste of ink and time. It's going to take twice as long to print your print, and you're not going to get much of a benefit, if any, from it. So the first time you make a print, at least try the 1440. If you think you can get a little bit more out of it, then of course go back and try it at 2880. But I always print at this setting. You can also see on the flip side, if I go from basic to advanced color settings, that we've got S and color management is turned off. Okay, that's important in the cases, some printers this will turn off automatically, and I'll show you why in a second, in a few slides down. But you want to make sure that the color management is turned off. Here's the target, and of course you would use the, I'm going to skip to the next slide. This is the reader and the easel that comes with it. You would use the reader, the SpiderPrint reader, to scan across each row of color patches. It's very simple to use. It's best to do this while you're sitting in a chair at your desk. Take note of this tabletop. I did this photograph for a reason. You can see that this is a granite counter. It's got a lot of color in it and a lot of variation in color in it. And you can't really tell, but there's 2 sheets of paper here, and there's a reason for that. The light that this device uses is very intense. It's intense, so it takes a very precise reading of the color that's on the printed page. Unfortunately, what does happen is the light is so intense that it will reach through that sheet of paper and read the color on the table too. So what you have to do is put 1 or 2 extra sheets of paper underneath your target before you start reading the patches. And actually, regardless of which calibration device you're using, I would recommend that. Either put it on a white easel, or better yet, put a couple of the sheets of the same paper underneath it so that paper white stays the same, and then take your readings. So you're going to print the series of color patches. You're going to use the printer calibration software and hardware to measure and calculate the corrections, and that creates an ICC profile. Now earlier when we calibrated our display, that also created an ICC profile. That profile is saved to the system. Every time you boot up, that profile is applied to your display. The same thing is going to happen when you print, except you have to select the display in the software. I'm going to show you how to do that. You're going to improve your color accuracy, your shadow and highlight detail, your mid-tone transitions, and much more. And now that you've got a calibrated display, you're well on your way to getting a good screen-to-print match. Okay, so let's jump to Lightroom 5, and we're in the print module. And you can see over here it says color management, and it says profile and managed by printer. Now this is an issue. This is one of my pet peeves because the default is managed by printer. That's the easy way. That's the beginner's way. It works okay, but it's not great. It's just not. It's not what you can. It's not going to live up to the potential that it could when you operate this way. Managed by printer means that the little tiny brain in the computer that's the size of a pea is going to analyze your incoming data, the data from your image, and it's going to try and make decisions about what the color should look like. It'll do its best, and the manufacturers do a pretty decent job of setting it up, but it's just not going to measure up to a custom profile. So if you leave it this way, you're going to get an okay print or a so-so print. On the other hand, go to the next screen. This is a drop-down, so if I click on this double arrow, I'm going to see the profiles that I've imported into Lightroom, and I'm going to be able to select that profile. Remember when we did soft proofing? Same principle. We're going to select that ICC, that paper profile, perhaps the one we just created using SpiderPrint, and we're going to select that. We're going to select a rendering tint, either perceptual or relative colorimetric in this case. And what's going to happen is that Lightroom does provide a soft proof again here. You're going to be able to see that. And when you send it to the printer, it's going to use that profile to adjust the color in your image to give you the best color possible and the best screen to print match possible. You can see here when you click the print dialog, I'm repeating something I said before. There's actually an error on here that I want to correct in a moment. Since I'm printing on a gloss, that Colorado fiber is a gloss or a fiber or a semi-gloss paper, I want to pick the paper that's closest to it, in large part because it's the type of finish on the paper and what's generally thought to be the thickness of the paper that's going through the machine. And so you would pick the paper here that would be the closest to it. And of course, down here, I pointed this out just a moment ago, you really don't want to have high speed enabled. That crept into there. I've got to get that out of that particular slide. High speed is going to, it's good for making a quick print, but it definitely has an impact on print quality 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 times. Okay, so here's a slightly more correct screenshot. Let me just see how far down I've gotten here. Right, okay. So this is a better look at this. You can see that high speed is turned off. I do use 16-bit output. I don't think it makes a huge difference in your print. A lot of people ask me that. It does send over more data to the printer, but there's what's called a transform that's made along the way. It transforms your image data into printer data, and it is going to convert it down to 8 bits anyway, but it does slightly improve some images. It's certainly worth a try. It will take longer to spool it over to the printer at 16 bits. So if you're shooting 16-bit RAW and you keep it at 16 bits, you may as well click this button and see how you do with the printer. You can see, again, we're set at superfine at 1440. None of these are enabled. The only time I ever check on finest detail is if I find that it's just not getting the right density in the print, or the really fine details like very small leaves or blades of grass or fine hairs on a model, you know, are not quite making it, and I'll click on finest detail and repeat the print. You can see here that color management is off, and the latest Epson printers, when you enable application managed color and you select a printer profile, color management will turn itself off. On some of the Canon printers, you have to go, and in Windows in particular, you have to go to the printer driver tabs, and you have to find the right tab and turn color management off manually. This is CS6. It looks very similar to previous versions, say, of CS5, except CS5 and CS4 divided this into 3 columns. It's now been collapsed into 2, and you can see that some of those functions are drop-down arrows over here on the right. On the left, you can see a preview of your print, and if you click on this box that says Match Print Colors, it's your last chance to see a soft proof or a live color preview before you send it to the printer. You can see here that already I have changed it from Printer Managed Color to Photoshop Managed Color. The term Application Managed Color is synonymous with that. It depends on which application you're using, what you're going to see in that box. I've selected that printer profile. So again, we're not in Printer Managed Color. And the rendering temp in this case is perceptual. I should mention, by the way, that this webinar is being recorded. It's going to be available online. So a lot of this intense detail that I'm providing right now is going to be made available at a later date. Now, let me just take a quick look at some of these questions. Yes, you can calibrate the display on a MacBook Pro with a Retina display. I didn't quite say that right, but I think you get the idea. Okay, there's some questions here on Zenfolio that you're going to have to ask Zenfolio. Okay, when soft proofing, how do you set proof conditions when you're sending your files to a lab? There's a couple of ways to do this. One of the ways to do this is to ask the lab to send you a test file and a test print. You can put that file on your computer, and you can use their test print. Another to check your display. Another way to do that is to ask them for an ICC profile. Some labs will provide that and some won't. And the way to install that ICC profile, if you go to the help screen in Photoshop or in Lightroom and put in ICC profile, it will tell you where to park that file, which folder. And it depends on which version of Windows you're in. On the Mac, it's typically the user library color sync profiles, if my memory serves correctly. But it's easy to look up in Photoshop or Lightroom, so don't take my word for it. You know, you can trust me, but verify. I'm not prepared to cover this in Aperture, sorry. The presentation is available to review later. Let's see. Yeah, I answered that question. I think I've gotten to some of the major ones. Now there's a statement here that says with the Epson 3880 you can only use their profiles. That's not true because I use custom profiles all the time. Even if you make a custom profile, you can import it to Lightroom. However, Epson does not recognize it. That does work. I do that all the time. In fact, I have helped the fellow who used the image you saw earlier from Hunts Mesa. I make prints with him all the time. We make custom profiles with SpiderPrint all the time and use them on the 3880 without any issues whatsoever. So yes, if you're having trouble with that, you have SpiderPrint and you're having trouble with that, do contact us through the technical support line and we'll try to help you. Okay. The difference between perceptual and relative rendering intent, without getting into a totally geeky color scientist discussion, it's a difference in the way that the range of color, which is called the gamut, is mapped to the printer. In other words, the color that's in your image has to be reorganized and sent to the printer so the printer can handle it. The printer's color gamut is less than the image on your screen most of the time. So part of what the rendering intent does is it helps manage that transformation to the printer. If you want more details about that, you can Google it, but I think the explanation beyond that is going to make your head explode, to be honest. Perceptual is generally described as being pleasing. Perceptual is pleasing, so it tends to do the transformation in a way that makes the image pleasing to the eye and tends to render the colors most naturally. A relative colorimetric rendering intent tends to be more literal. It tends to put the colors on paper very close to what's actually in the image file. It does less movement of the colors into other places. If the colors fall outside the printer gamut, sometimes they get left behind or they get mapped differently. And again, I'm in danger of boring everybody to death, so I'm going to stop there. What monitors do you suggest to buy that are easier to calibrate and more accurate? The monitors that I tend to work with tend to be the moderately priced ones. I like the Dell. I just did a review of one of the Asus monitors for professional photographer. You can take a look at that. I like LaCie, and Azo is still, in my book, pretty much king of the hill. They have a couple of models. They're not cheap. They're very, very good. There's an older model that I still have called the HP Dreamcolor, which is absolutely excellent across the board for both still photography and video. Oh boy, sharpening workflow. You know, instead of answering that, I think what I'm going to do is put that down. It's a little bit off topic, as you say in your comment. I think what I'm going to do is include that I have a webinar coming up on fine art printing down the road, and I think what I'm going to do is include that in that webinar, so stand by. I'm going to try and, let's see here, if there's any other. I think that's we're getting close to our deadline here, so I think I'm going to stop with the questions. I am going to provide my email address at the end of the webinar, so if you have additional questions, do feel free to send me those. I will answer them. So let's move on. Printing tips. I want you to keep in mind that inkjet prints are what's called metameric, in the sense that the lighting condition that you are using is going to affect the way you see the color in the print. So it's important to either go to a window that doesn't have direct sunlight and lots of bright light coming in, sort of a shaded window, to get daylight balanced viewing, or get a daylight balanced desk lamp or viewing station. It's a little bit of an investment, but if you're looking at these prints in office fluorescence or household incandescent bulbs, or even worse, the little curlicue light bulbs are the worst in the world for this, your prints are going to look strange. and they're not going to match your screen. So a lot of the times I get technical support calls where people have calibrated their display and they make a print and they're looking at the print under a fluorescent bulb and they're wondering why it doesn't match. Well, that's the reason. It's important to let your prints dry overnight, particularly with the Epson printers. The Epson printers, the aqueous solution, Epson recommends at least 24 hours. If you talk to some of the Epson technical guys, they'll say days before framing. And certainly you want to let them dry overnight before you evaluate them and make your final evaluation about how the print looks. You can, if you want them to cure more quickly or dry more quickly, if you use archival interleaving paper and make a stack of your prints, the paper helps draw that solution out of the inkjet receiver layer and will help the print dry faster. If the print is really wet coming off the printer, you need to ask yourself whether you actually have color management turned off. You're not double color managing the print, by the way. When you store them, you put them in an archival box. Dark storage with protected interleaving is the best way to go. It's important to make a note here about something, and that is that if you think about archiving your images, prints are probably the most durable way to archive your images that's available. If you think about digital storage, we all know that we don't really know how long things are going to last on a hard drive, and we don't really know if they're going to last 100 years on a CD. But we do know that we've got prints right now that were made 150 years ago, and we're making prints right now that are being tested rigorously by guys like Henry Wilhelm. We know those prints are going to last 100 or 200 years in dark storage with the right kind of materials. So what I have done, I've taken some of my most important images and I have printed them, and they're in dark storage with interleaving paper, and they're put away along with my digital backups and things like that. So it's a nice way, relatively inexpensive, to back up your files and protect yourself against loss. So I'm going to wrap up now. It's important to understand that it's relatively easy to get prints that match your display. It takes a lot longer to talk about this than it does to set it up and get away from the tweak print cycle, which wastes money, time, and space. You can improve image quality from capture to print with a relatively modest investment, certainly much less than you invested in your camera and lenses, and yet it will maximize the quality of the images that you're generating, even if they're just for electronic display. But even more importantly, down the road, at some point you're going to want to close the loop and make a print on some of your best images. It's easy to use for the beginner, and actually the software is set up to be easy for the beginner, and it provides the flexibility and real power for aspiring professionals and professionals. So I strongly encourage you to look at this. It will really improve the way you look at your work. It will give you more impetus to try harder when you're out in the field or in the studio. Okay, webinars. We did record this webinar. It will be available online within a couple of days. It's at spider.datacolor.com. And some of the previous recorded topics, they're not all just color management. We do one on focus controls, remote triggering, convergence of still and motion capture. We've been doing a lot of work on video lately and on time-lapse photography. There's some articles on the blog, too, about a lot of this stuff. Floral photography, architectural photography, composition. There's at least 2 webinars on composition. We have a webinar coming up on March 26th, which is a nice complement to this one. It's custom printmaking for fine art paper. It's co-sponsored by Red River. And I will definitely include some information about sharpening in that webinar, so make a note. See the website. We're adding more webinars every day. In fact, I was talking to our marketing manager this morning. We're going to be posting some more webinars going out through the end of April, maybe even into the beginning of May. So we've got some good topics coming up for you, so stay tuned. If you haven't signed up for the notifications, please do so. I want to thank Datacolor and Zenfolio for sponsoring this webinar. Datacolor is at datacolor.com or spider.datacolor.com. Zenfolio.com is their website. Just a second here. Okay. The discounts and rebates. We have a 20% off all Datacolor Spider products purchased at spider.datacolor.com. That's our website. The discount code is Zen20. That's a very peaceful sound, isn't it? It's valid through the 20th in the U.S. only. Zenfolio has a 20% discount off the first year service at any account level. The discount code is Screen2Print20. I'm sorry about this web link. I'm going to leave it on the screen here. You might want to write it down or take a screenshot. That expires on, it looks like 4/13/2014. The giveaways, the Spider 4 Pro is going to go to John Williamson. John, our marketing manager, is going to get in touch with you via email to get your particulars and get this out to you. And Sally Allen, you're the winner of the Zenfolio Premium Business Account. Again, someone will reach out to you with the details on that. My name is David Saffer. I'm your presenter for today. I'm generally the host of these webinars. My email address, the most important part of this, is dsaffer@mac.com. Most important part of this next blurb, not the whole slide. My email is dsaffer@mac.com. I want to point out that I do answer emails from my students. If I don't answer you in the first 24 hours, that means I missed it because there were a lot of emails that day. Don't be afraid to bug me. I won't get insulted. Just say, this is second request. I have this question, and I'll do my best to answer it or find a way to direct you to an answer. My partner in these webinars is David Toby. He has a great blog at cdtoby.wordpress.com. My blog needs to be updated. It's at davidsaffer.wordpress.com. I do encourage you to go and sign up because I'm planning a major overhaul in the last part of this month and in early April. I'm going to be updating the content on there in a big way, and so you're going to find that the existing content can be very helpful to you, but I'm going to be adding quite a bit of content between now and the middle of April. So stay tuned for further webinars. I thank you for joining us all. I hope you have a great day and a great week, and see you next time.